Everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast. My name is Mo, and I'll be sitting in the host chair today. I have with me a special guest, Andy Crocker. He's an aerospace executive who once led a team competing with the likes of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos to help NASA return humans to the moon. That journey, while extraordinary, did end in a little bit of disappointment, but from that loss, Andy found a higher mission. He wrote the Unconditionals, 5 timeless values to live without limits and ignite your superpower, a guide to living with meaning and resilience. I'm so excited to have Andy on the show today. Andy, welcome.
Thank you, Mo. Really glad to be here.
Yeah, before I get to my questions, why don't you tell my audience a little bit about yourself, your journey? How did you get to where you are today?
Sure. Like you said at the beginning, I've been an aerospace executive. I've been in aerospace for 30 years. So got a degree in aerospace engineering in college and went right into it out of college and have worked in it for 30 years. Aerospace covers, a lot of different areas, but for me, it's always been in the space part. So I've always been working on space projects, whether it's been defense, which I've done a little bit of, but I've done a lot of work with NASA and some with commercial space companies. And that's been a fantastic career. A lot of opportunities to work with great people, great teams, really cool projects. I've always been kind of on the front end, early development, coming up with new concepts. What's going to replace the space shuttle? What's going to go to the moon? And so that's been a lot of fun.
Wow. Can you tell us what it's like to lead a team that competed with SpaceX, Blue Origin, and what the heck is NASA's human landing system?
Yeah, sure. In my whole career, I started my career in the mid 90s. And so it was 20 years after the last time we'd been to the moon with humans. And throughout my whole career, NASA, every once in a while would come back and say, okay, we're going to go back to the moon. But it never happened. But in late 2018, NASA said, okay, it was like December. There were rumors and hints, and finally NASA said, we're going to do it. It's time. Most importantly, the technology has developed to the point that industry, not just NASA and hundreds of thousands of people across the country, but even at industry, the technology exists for us to develop landers working with NASA, but really industry is leading. And that's now possible. It probably wasn't even 10 years ago, but it is now possible. So NASA announced it. And about that time, I went to my leadership in my company and said, I really think we ought to try to do this. For one reason, nobody else has done it. So we're not really behind any other companies. No, industry has gone to the moon and the technologies are out there for anybody to use. So why don't we give it a shot? And so we threw our hat in the ring and the first opportunity was about a dozen companies that got funded for early studies. And we just kept plowing ahead. And each time we would ask ourselves, do we really have what it takes to get to the next phase? And I personally was just so passionate about it and so psyched about the opportunity to participate that I really pushed it hard. And so the first real opportunity for a contract to develop a lunar lander. I mean, the human landing system is just what it sounds like. It is a system to land humans on the moon. It is the new version of the Apollo lander, essentially. Much more capable, with all the modern technologies, right? But the first big contract that really was sort of separating the wheat from the chaff, it was our company and SpaceX, owned by Elon Musk, and Blue Origin, owned by Jeff Bezos. And that was obviously a trip. It was a fantastic opportunity, but also really gave us sort of the underdog status because nobody knew who we were. When you're in that position, you get I think you get a little bit of slack. People don't expect anything from us. So therefore, they don't necessarily look at us with as harsh a lens maybe as the other guys. But in any case, we were in the competition and lost the first round. SpaceX won. They subsidized their bid significantly. And of course, as a company is run by the individual that they are and subsidized, the way they are, they're able to do that. Then we got a chance for the next competition, and it was us and Blue Origin, and turned out the same way. They subsidized their bid, and we just weren't able to do that, and so we lost again. And it was a fantastic project. The best part for me, not just being able to lead the team, but to be on a team of such amazing people. when we first won, we started with just a few dozen people working on it, and we had to build up to a few hundred and work with many other companies that, each of which brought hundreds of people. And that team turned out to be such an amazing group of folks. And so I learned so much as a leader, but participating in that kind of an opportunity with a team like that was a real thrill.
I've always told people failure is a lot of times it ends in heartbreak,
Right.
but you learn so much from failure. So, how does an experience like that reshape your understanding of leadership and success?
Well, during the effort, I learned so much. And like you said, as a leader, having to either teach things to people or in this case, lead a team of amazingly smart people who have a passion for this project, being able to be a part of that. But one of the major things I learned in that job was this is the kind of system where no one person is going to know everything. It is way too complex. The project is there's just way too much to it. So that kind of gives you an opportunity, sort of gives you an excuse as a leader to say, I don't have to know everything. I can step back, let those people each do their own thing that they're great at, and I can facilitate collaboration across the team, right? And that was a great lesson for me. Again, it kind of forced my hand because the project is so complex, but it also made me realize, hey, that's really what leaders ought to do anytime is hire smart people, get out of the way and let them do what they do, but facilitate collaboration. And in the case of a human landing system, it's so complex that every little change you make in one area changes things across the whole system. So you have to make sure there's communication across the system, across the people. That was such a big part of what my job was to make sure that that conversation, communication, and collaboration was facilitated. And then in the case of the loss, number one lesson was really be transparent and open and very communicative with people about what's going to happen. When you're in a competition like this, it's kind of a 0 or 1. Either you win or you don't. And you win and you're going to go work on this project theoretically for years and the team's
Yeah.
going to expand like crazy. You lose and the team goes away. And so, everybody's on pins and needles because in many cases, in almost every case, everybody's got to go get a new job. And it forced me and the people that led with me to really work hard to be transparent with the team to say, here's what we know. I'm going to tell you everything I know. And yeah, if we lose, we're going to have to reorganize and move people around. And in many cases, people are going to leave the company. But I'm going to tell you everything I know and tell you how we're going to operate. Because if we have to let people go, here's how we're going to do it so that you can make the best decision for you and your family. And I think that, of course we made mistakes. Of course, you never, when you have hundreds of people that you have to place, you're never going to get everything right. But at least we knew we were upfront, transparent, and allowed people to make decisions that were good for them. And then in many, many cases, helped them, make those decisions, help them find those things. So having integrity in the way that we operated, even when we knew it was possible we were going to lose and have to make these hard decisions. And then when we did lose, maintaining that integrity to, even though that happened, we're going to continue to stick to our principles and do the best we can for the people who were on our team.
I say this to leaders all the time now. You want to surround yourself with smart people, no matter how smart you are. I think you're the first person that I've ever actually talked to who is in a room. You guys are all smart. And
Right.
so when you lead a team of people that know so much and need to know things like getting people home from space, landing people on the moon, anything to do with space, we've all heard the term, well, I'm not a rocket scientist. But when you're dealing with people in that space, I mean, Andy, how is that? Because you're smart, they're smart, everybody's an engineer of sorts. How do you pull that together? And how do you lead from the premise of, hey, you always want to get people around you who are smarter than you? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. When you're, again, there's a bit of a forcing function in that kind of a project in that every part of it, even though the technology exists, it's still not easy, right? And of course, we made the joke, it is rocket science. It is rocket science, but the fact is everything is hard
Yeah.
And the hardest part is getting it all to work together correctly. So you have to hire people who are really good at their hard part. You have to divide it up into lots of smaller parts and then smaller parts from there and smaller parts from there. And every person you hire, you want them to be the best they can be in that little part. And then their
Right.
manager is the best at bringing together those parts and that part of the system and so forth. So obviously you hire the, not just the smartest, but the people who are most passionate about this project because they're going to go above and beyond. They've got a great work ethic. And then probably the most important thing we looked for was people who are good team players. They are good at working together, or at least, on paper and in the interviews, they came across as good at working together to solve problems. And we we didn't hire just aerospace engineers, just people who've worked in space. We hired people from the automotive industry, commercial aircraft, the power industry, lots of areas. But these people wanted to work in space. They wanted to work on a lunar lander specifically. They were really good at what they did, and they could work well with people. And so that part of it makes that working on a very hard problem easier. And then the other piece is because I knew that I couldn't do all the other parts. I mean, there's just no way one person can do it, or even a small number of people. That relieved me from having to try, and I could just back off and say, how can I help you? Most of the time I would think about my job as removing barriers. What can I do to get issues out of the way for you so that you can do your job? And and then I'll just go look to see how I can remove the barrier from somebody else and then help you guys work together. So that's the that's the nice thing about working in rocket science is you're excused from having to know everything. You can let other people know their part better than anybody else, and you can just focus on making it easier on them.
Yeah, that's really funny because in your industry, you can't just act like you know more than somebody else, like a lot of leaders do, because it's like, well, we hired this guy because he actually is a rocket scientist, or we hired this lady because she knows this one piece, and so
That's right.
leadership becomes more important. And I love your theory of macro management. Give them the tools, let them do what they're good at, and get out
Right.
of the way. Andy, I'd love to talk about your new book, your newest book, the Unconditionals. What inspired you to go from aerospace leadership to writing a book on timeless values? How did that come about?
Yeah, there were two major factors that played into that. One was it was when we lost. We had been in this competition with fantastic companies doing this amazing project with a fantastic team. And it was the highlight of my career. For 5 years, I led this team and we worked. And even though we lost, we all of us to a person look back at it and say, what an amazing opportunity that was. What a great time we had and what a fantastic team it was. But I lost, and in that situation, you can't help but step back and say, what am I going to do next? And so that was a big part of it. And then the other was that my son had just become a senior, just started his senior year in high school, and I had always kind of wanted to write things down for my kids, like this is what I think is important. So those two things
Right.
kind of came together, and I said, okay, I've got to start writing things down, one, for my kids. And as I started that process, I realized I'm writing it down for myself too. This is what I think is important. And I've never really put that down on paper. And as I got into it, it ended up becoming a book, but it really helped me to understand and realize the title of the book, The Unconditionals, that these key values, and the ones I chose are love, gratitude, integrity, accountability, and endeavor. Those values are ones that we have to live no matter what's going on, no matter what happens in our lives. So if we win a big project or lose, if somebody treats us like trash, or if they're our best friend, if the situation is super easy and we can go do anything we want, or it's very, very difficult, in in every circumstance, we have to try to live these values unconditionally. And that really became the focus, and why I feel like this book is very important.
Yeah, when I was reading the book, I thought to myself, every leader needs to read this because there are so many dangers in leadership. Andy, what are some of the dangers, some of the traps of living conditionally, especially for leaders?
Yeah, conditionality, in very broad terms, is letting the circumstances, letting something outside yourself define how you're going to act, how you're going to react, how you're going to behave. And that's dangerous because one, it forces your hand. Every time you make a decision, you have to think about, okay, how am I going to react in this situation based on what's going on? And you're never going to be consistent and be fair in every situation if you have to reevaluate every time. Hey, what's going on and how am I going to handle it? The other thing that is critical about it is the communication, the trust that you build up with in your relationships, whether it's in the workplace or outside, depends on consistency, authenticity, and those things really require unconditionality. They require you to be the same way all the time. The thoughts, the words, the actions have to agree with each other in order for you to really build and then maintain that trust with other people. So I became convinced as I wrote the book. It wasn't clear to me at the beginning, but I became convinced as I kept working on the book that really trying to be unconditional in every circumstance makes it easier, but also much more of a consistent approach that allow people to trust you no matter what's going on.
You mentioned the 5 pillars. Let's start with love.
Mhm.
How can love be a leadership asset?
Yeah. To me, love applies in every situation, and certainly people don't think about it in leadership context, even in the workplace. Most of the time when we talk about love in the workplace, it's like that's uncomfortable or even maybe inappropriate. I'm talking about love in terms of respect and kindness and compassion. And that applies to everybody. So in the workplace or in a leadership position, having respect for every person, no matter where they come from, no matter what they're bringing to the table, having respect for them and counting on them respecting you as a leader and earning that respect, having kindness and treating everyone with understanding and empathy for their situation, but also just for their person, and then compassion, which is more than sympathy or empathy. It's compassion is actually not only feeling for someone, but trying to do something to help them. So as a leader, it's not just recognizing that someone in your team needs help, but helping to find that support that they need or working with them to, you know, resolve the issue, whatever that is. And so all of those things really make up love for a leader. And again, it just all comes back to trust and people being able to count on the fact that they're valued, they're appreciated, and they can feel safe in the team.
Uh, let's talk about the next timeless value, which is gratitude. And here's the funny part, Andy. One of my clients that I was talking to, we were trying to figure out a word for him for this year. And we came up with the word gratitude.
Mhm.
As we were going through our sessions together, I started reading your book and I thought every leader needs to understand gratitude. So, my question is, what shifts when a leader builds a culture of gratitude?
Right. Gratitude, particularly unconditional gratitude, is so important because it removes the need for more and allows you to appreciate what you have and build on what you have. It doesn't mean that you don't want to achieve more as a team or that you don't want to continue to grow as a person. That's all part, in fact, it's part of endeavor. But gratitude means that you're living life appreciating what you have, and life is a blessing. I mean, talk about that in the book, and I know you can appreciate that. Being from the South, I'm in Alabama. Being from the South, blessing is sort of a common word here and almost taken for granted. But what it really means is, I don't take things for granted. I appreciate, number one, the fact that I'm alive and I woke up this
Yeah.
morning and, I have a family and I have a job and I have, all of these things that I'm not guaranteed. I haven't earned most of those things. A lot of these things have come to me because of the culture that I'm in or the situation that I'm in or the wonderful other people that are around me. So it requires appreciation for what I have. And then in a leadership situation, turning that into showing the people that you're with that they are valued, that they're not just valued, but they're accepted as people. and that goes back to love. It really leans on unconditional love. They're respected and accepted as people, no matter who they are, but then they're valued and whatever they can bring to the table. Everybody's going to bring something different to the table. It's all
Yeah.
valuable. That's valued. You appreciate it. And that helps them to want to do more because they feel like, hey, I'm part of this. We're going to work together.
I'd love to talk about your next timeless value, Andy, which is integrity. Why is integrity more than just doing the right thing?
Doing the right thing is such an important part of it, but it really depends. I think it leans so much on all the values. And I talked earlier about authenticity and consistency. And really, I think consistency wraps that value up really well because integrity, the meaning of integrity really comes from the same word as integer, which means whole. It means it all fits together. And so integrity, really, we should think about that as, hey, this represents who I am. This is my identity. And if my identity is inconsistent, then that integrity is unstable. It doesn't hold together. And so other people see that and they realize that, I can't necessarily depend on that person. So in the easy times and the hard times, in conversations in the hallway, just like the conversations in the boardroom, you have to be the same person you have to try in what's in your mind and what's in your words and what's in your actions so that people see that, but also you see it in yourself and you begin to identify with that wholeness and with that acceptance of, hey, this is who I am. I'm going to behave the same way no matter what's going on. And then it becomes
Yeah,
easy when you're in the tough situation because your identity is, I'm living this value. I'm going to make this decision despite what the circumstances are because that's who I am.
I appreciate that answer. And I think a lot of leaders need to hear that. I talk often about the difference between integrity and character. Character is doing the right thing when people are watching, and integrity is doing it and the right thing even when somebody's not looking.
That's right.
The next one is going to be a favorite of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast co-host. A shout out to Scotty. He's going to love this one right here. This is his favorite word, accountability. And Andy, you talk about accountability. How can leaders foster healthy accountability without fear?
That's a good question. Yeah, I like the way you ask that. I think it's something that builds over time. It is built over time by the team. And what I mean by that is, accountability, it's probably my favorite in the book too, because I kind of, as I really got into this and tried to understand what is accountability, how is it different from integrity, because there's a lot of similarities, particularly in
Mhm.
how people talk about them. But accountability is owning it. You know, you have something that your people are looking to you to do, and you own it, no matter what's going to happen. And that accountability is so tightly connected with unconditionality to me because it basically says, whatever the outcome is, I'm going to own it. If there's credit due, I'm going to share the credit, but if there's blame, I'm taking the blame. And so teaching that, building that into team requires the leader to show that, right? And in most cases, that means the leader says, look, if something goes wrong, that's on me. I'll go take the blame for it, but let's go work together to make it right. And then when it goes right, you show the team, hey, everybody was part of this. So that's a big part of it. But then a key in building accountability is giving the responsibility to members of the team and allowing them to
Yeah.
go show, hey, I'm going to own it. I'm going to own what you gave me.
Yes.
And you've demonstrated that you own the outcome, whatever it is. So you help them to learn how to do that. You help them to learn how to, you know, work through whatever it is. Hey, this is your commitment or this is your duty or whatever your job. You own that. And then when the outcome comes, you're going to accept it, but I'm going to help you learn how to deal with whatever that is. And so they have to learn so that then the goal is for the leader to be able to hand those major things off and let them be accountable and delegate the accountability so that you're still going to own everything as the leader of a team or of a project, but you
Right.
want those people to own it themselves so they can buy into the team and they can really learn and grow personally.
Well, I know Scott's really going to like that answer. This last one, Andy, I got to tell you, I don't hear this a lot from the books that I read, and I read a lot of books, every book on leadership, but seldom have I heard this last timeless value, which is endeavor. And you mentioned it before, and I'm so glad for you to take my audience through it a little bit. And here's my question. Why is striving or endeavoring essential to a fulfilling life?
I really went back and forth many times on one, should I include this as one of the unconditional values? And two, what should I call it?
Yeah.
And I really broke it down a lot of different ways, but I'm happy with where it ended up for several reasons. One is, as you probably noticed if you've looked at the book, there are a lot of pieces to it, and it allowed me to squeeze a lot of things into the book, sort of in a sneaky way. But the most important part is, and I say this in the book, you can live
Yeah.
a life that is fulfilling in many ways without endeavor. And I sort of use ascetics as an example. Not that ascetics don't do anything, but they separate themselves from the world in a way on purpose, and they can live with love and gratitude and integrity and accountability, but they're not in the world living and doing and acting in the world as it is. And that I just finally decided it is so important for us to know how to go live in the world and act, whatever those actions are, from team goals to personal goals, that I convinced myself to include it. And then the different pieces of endeavor are all the important factors or aspects of acting, but it's not reasonable for us to go bury our head in the sand and say the world is such an evil place, or it's too hard, or it's moving too fast, or I don't understand what's going on. We still have to live. You have to have those first four values, and accountability is critical because whatever you take on, you've got to own it. But you still have to know how to do, how to strive, how to act. And I feel like endeavor is such a important way to put all those pieces together. And I'll just go ahead and throw in that to me, that the most critical thing about endeavor and what comes out of it is growth. You certainly
Yeah.
can improve how you do those other values, but what endeavor really helps us most in is to grow personally. We have to do and succeed and fail in order to grow. And in many cases, it requires failure, right? You have to fail in order to understand what it takes to grow. So to personally grow in the world and live in the world, I think you have to try, you have to endeavor. And that, there's a lot to that, but it requires you to do more than just those first four.
It caught my eye right away. Every time I read a book, I skim through it first and then I go back and I read it. Which, by the way, shout out to your publisher. The way the book was laid out, it was easy to read. The sections were incredible,
Great.
and it's going to be on my shelf now. And I'm gonna shamelessly use it. And
Oh, thank you.
people are gonna think I'm really smart when I talk about these things. So if anybody listens to this and they hear me talk about Endeavor, they're gonna know that was Andy Crocker's. So
Oh, thanks so much. No, I really appreciate it.
yes, sir. It is a great book. I have a couple more questions.
Great.
And I really wanted to hear your thoughts on leading through change. What's been the hardest leadership lesson that you've personally had to learn?
I think the hardest for me, and it has to do in part with my personality. I say this a little bit in the book, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I get it naturally. I just grew up that way. And so I spent a lot of my life and career thinking of failure as a bad thing. And it's only recently, and before I wrote the book, but especially in writing the book and thinking about recent years, have I realized that failure is critical. Failure is super important because that's what we learn the most from. That's a cliche now. Thankfully, it's become, a lot of people understand it, so that it's become a cliche. You learn more from your failures than it's your successes. But even more than that, failure is a stepping stone. It's what allows us to eventually succeed, because it teaches those lessons, and it forces us to learn how to persevere, to learn how to, regather yourself and go at it again, or find a new angle, or a new perspective, or in some cases, realize, look, this is not something I'm going to be able to do. And that's okay, because I can have a different purpose. I can change my purpose that may fit me better anyway. And I talk a little bit in the book about some times when I've had to do that, but it's such a part of life. And one of my favorite quotes in the book from Thomas Watson Jr., he says, the formula for success is to double your rate of failure. Basically, you've got to go fail. You've got to fail in order to eventually succeed and more importantly, to grow.
In the book, he says that when you have that mindset, your thinking is failure as being an enemy to success, when really that's not the case at all.
That is definitely not what the world teaches. Unfortunately, I think it's a very strongly an American value that, success is what's so important, and failure is not allowed. It's even something in my space background that's become a mantra, failure is not an option. That's kind of unfortunate. Yeah, you don't want to fail so that the astronauts on Apollo 13 die. That's certainly true, but we can't just take those words and translate them into, well, this is how we should lead our lives, because failure absolutely is important. You want to fail in those smaller situations so that when you get in the tough situation where, Apollo 13 may fail and you'll lose 3 lives, where hey, I can succeed because I failed before. I figured out how to get around that. I figured out how to persevere, or in the case of Apollo 13, how to work with all these amazing people to figure out workarounds to allow us to bring these people back to Earth. So failure is necessary to grow, such that when it really counts, you'll know how to succeed.
And I think a lot of people that's a great point, Andy. In that epic movie Apollo 13, for instance, when Gene Kranz says, "Gentlemen, failure is not is not an option," he's right at that moment in time. But if you were to think about, to all those guys sitting in the room, how many times were they growing up and tinkering with things and failing and failing and failing
Right.
so that they could get to the point where they do what's right when it matters? You don't get to the moon without failure. You don't become Michael Jordan, Wayne
Exactly.
Gretzky,
Right.
Thomas Edison. You got to fail. And so many people, especially leaders, are afraid to fail. And so I guess a follow-up question on that, Andy, for you is, how do you stay grounded in your values during change, during failure?
hmm I think it really depends on what we do before then. It's really building those values beforehand so that when it's hard, again, we can look back at ourselves and say, oh, this is who I am. This is what I do, and I'm not going to change because of the circumstances. So again, it depends on unconditionality. Every time you have an opportunity, whatever the circumstances are, hey, I'm a person who loves, who has gratitude and integrity and accountability, because I've demonstrated it over and over again in my life. And the times when I haven't, I've learned from it and changed so that I can do that. So that now that I'm in this tough situation and I'm facing change or I'm facing challenges, I can then fall back to, well, this is who I am. No matter what, I'm going to do it again. And again, we're going to fail sometimes, right? It's part of it, but we learn from those. And so the next time we get to it, like in an Apollo 13 situation, then we know we can persevere.
How could today's leaders begin living out these timeless values starting this week? What do they do?
I really try hard in the book because I packed a lot into it. I know it's very dense, but I wanted to get it all down. But I certainly recognize that none of us can just go take all those values on at one time. And even an individual value has a lot to it. So you take one piece. Let's just take endeavor, for example, and attitude is one of the key parts of endeavor. And, you realize, hey, I'm a pessimistic person, but having a positive attitude, having an attitude of I'm going to go be successful and I'm going to work well with others is important. So I'm going to go work on that this week. Right. So I think picking one thing or a couple of things and just reminding yourself, hey, I need to have a great attitude no matter what the situation. I come into work today and, everything's gone wrong before I even got there. I'm going to really try unconditionally to have a good attitude. And you keep working on that until it starts to become a habit. There's so many great books about building habits, and I talk about James Clear's Atomic Habits, great one. But take small steps and get to the point where you've made progress, and then go pick another one. So you got to make sure to take it in chunks and take small steps. But I think pick those things that you really know you need to work on and take them one at a time.
Yeah, I think daily progress is really important. You got to get a little bit better every day. As John Maxwell says, one of my favorite leadership guys, you need to fail forward. And so it's not about getting it right all the time. It's about doing just a little bit more. So, Andy, I
Right.
really
Right.
appreciate that encouragement. Andy, where can my audience connect with you? Where can they find the book? What do they need to do to get in touch?
Thanks for asking. CrockerBooks.com. Just go to andycrockerbooks.com. It'll talk about the book. You can find out a little bit more about me and my background. You can connect with me there, and certainly you can click and find the book in all the locations where it is, which is pretty much everywhere. It's in paperback, hardback, and ebook now, and within a couple of weeks it should be out in audiobook too. So for those who really like to listen in the car, hopefully they'll wait a couple of weeks and look for it there.
Are you actually reading your own audiobook or did you get somebody
I
else to do it?
did, yeah. I finished it. It's
Hey,
uploaded to the
okay.
platforms, so it'll be out there. Yeah, it was a as you may know, it's its own labor of love, independent of writing the book. But it was a great
Absolutely.
learning experience. That was part of why I wanted to do it. I wanted to understand
Yeah.
what it really takes to do it, and I would have much rather have some guy with this deep British accent, but I've decided both to save money and just to understand what it takes. I decided to do it.
Congratulations on the book, Andy. It is incredible for my listeners. Pick it up. You need to read this book. It really will give you new insights on what you maybe are missing in your leadership. The book is called The Unconditionals, 5 Timeless Values to Live Without Limits and Ignite Your Superpower. Don't forget to sign up for the Rising Tide newsletter. It's free. We give you the good stuff, and it's a monthly. Andy, thanks for making the time today. I look forward to applying the principles of your book in my own life and for my clients. And I wish you the best, and I hope to have you on again soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mo. Really enjoyed it. Great questions, and I loved having the conversation.
Yes, sir. Have a good one.
Thanks. You too.